Why Johnny Can't Read, and What You Can Do About It, by Rudolf Flesch, with a new foreword from Reader's Digest, Why Our Children Aren't Reading. Foreword by Edward Ziegler. Why Our Children Aren't Reading. After 6-year-old Luke finished kindergarten, he and his grandfather began a summer project, teaching Luke to read. The pair sat down one July morning with a list of words that made up the first of 72 lessons. Soon, Luke learned the sounds of 5 short vowels and 17 simple consonants, and began reading words like jam, nip, wag, and hop. The lists went on to cover words with other sounds and spellings, and 2 or more syllables: chipmunk, kangaroo, and snowball. The last list included liberty, independence, and blueberries. 6 weeks later, at a Chinese restaurant, Luke read his fortune cookie to his proud family. Careful planning will bring rich rewards. How could Luke learn to read so quickly? His grandfather had used a foolproof method of teaching based on the alphabetic code. With few exceptions, all English words are spelled by this code, which consists of fewer than 200 letters and letter groups, each standing for one or more of the 44 sounds in English. Once a child has learned this code, he can read. Luke's grandfather is Rudolf Flesch, a prophet of reading reform. His celebrated book, Why Johnny Can't Read, 1955, is still in print and contains the 72 lessons that Luke learned. A 1981 sequel, Why Johnny Still Can't Read, repeated his recipe for resolving the crisis of our schools. And now, an official U.S. Department of Education report endorses Flesch's insistence on teaching the alphabetic code. Third World Scenario. In that first Johnny, Flesch wrote, "The teaching of reading in the United States flies in the face of all logic and common sense." He explained that by the 1930s, to rid their classrooms of what one education professor called heartless drudgery, America's reading teachers abandoned the alphabetic code and began to teach children to guess and memorize the meanings of tens of thousands of words they could see in print. "What I suggested," Flesch said recently, "was very simple. Go back to the ABCs. Teach children the 44 sounds of English and how they are spelled. Then they can sound out each word from left to right and read it off the page." What he advocated has come to be known as phonics first instruction. As Flesch explains it, with phonics first, you teach a child to read the word fish by telling him about the sounds of F, F, I, short, I, and SH, sh. Then you tell him to blend the sounds from left to right to read the word fish. To teach the word by the look and say system, you give the child a picture of a fish with fish printed underneath and encourage him to memorize the group of letters that make up fish. Then you print the word again and again and hope the child will remember what the word fish looks like and what it means. You do the same thing, more or less, with many thousands of other English words. Most such instruction, Flesch insists, is not reading, but word guessing. In 90% of our schools, he says, reading isn't taught at all. Books are put in front of the children, and they are told to guess at the words, or to wait until teacher tells them. And the guessing goes on and on. Flesch blames the look and say method for our alarming decline in literacy. Some 27 million American adults are functionally illiterate, and 45 million more are only marginally literate. The number of adult problem readers is increasing by 2.3 million each year. At this rate, says Flesch, we'll soon join the ranks of such undereducated third world countries as Bangladesh, Haiti, and Uganda. Phonics first versus look and say. Flesch's sharply worded criticisms have brought an avalanche of accusations from the reading establishment, which remains firmly committed to the look and say method. Professional journals have called him a crank, a menace to the cause of good education, and an ignoramus. Flesch, who earned his PhD at Teachers College, Columbia University, says his critics act as if a beginning reader were learning a foreign language. But, says Flesch, independent studies have proved that the average child comes to school with a speaking and listening vocabulary of about 24,000 words. Learning to read is simply learning a system of notation for the language the child already knows. As he wrote in the first Johnny, ever since 1500 BC, wherever an alphabetic system of writing was used, people have learned to read by simply memorizing the sound of each letter in their alphabet. Except 20th century America. We have thrown 3,500 years of civilization out the window. The modern look and say method started with education professors at Columbia University and the University of Chicago. Dick and Jane and other basal reader series were soon developed. These products presumably made learning to read wholly painless for small children, says Flesch. Today, 90% of our schools use look and say. In the 55 years since the introduction of look and say, many reading effectiveness studies have been made. As Flesch wrote in the second Johnny, 124 such studies have carefully compared phonics first and look and say. Not a single one proved the superiority of look and say. I got it done. Although the reading establishment has ignored Flesch's system, the U.S. government has not. In its recent report, Becoming a Nation of Readers, it acknowledges that Flesch's basic assumptions are right. Sponsored by the U.S. Department of Education, this report is the result of 2 years' work by a 9-member commission on reading chaired by Richard C. Anderson of the University of Illinois. The report recommends that teachers of beginning reading should present well-designed phonics instruction. The report says that most reading programs use phonics only in an incidental way. The teacher might write a list of words, such as sand, soft, and slip on the board, and let the class discover that all have the letter S in common. Only then will the children be told that the letter stands for the sound you hear at the beginning of sand, soft, and slip. Flesch remarks that such analytic phonics is not phonics at all. The children have memorized the look of sand, soft, and slip long before the teacher lets them in on the secret of the sound of S. Flesch also criticizes the overuse of common words that are not spelled as they sound. The upshot is that look and say books obstruct the link that the young pupil might otherwise make between the letters and the sound of the word they spell. For example, one basal reader includes this passage. "We have come, Grandma," said Anna. "We have come to work with you." "Come in," Grandma said. These 3 sentences have 17 words, Flesch points out. Most of them don't follow the rule of spelling. By those rules, have should rhyme with save, come with home, said with made, to with so, you with thou. These irregularly spelled words prevent the child from learning the alphabetic code. Each time the child faces an unfamiliar word whose meaning he hasn't memorized, he can only guess its meaning from the context. Even our best readers habitually skip all short prepositions, articles, and conjunctions and misread back as black, kid as kind, razzing as realizing, physicians as physicists, and manicured lawns as manufactured lawns. We have become a country of programmed inaccuracy. In the first Johnny, a passage suggests the shortcomings of the look and say method. A child who had successfully read the word children on a flashcard was unable to read it in a book. He insisted that he had never seen the word before. Then he was presented with the flashcard and asked how he recognized the word as children. "By the smudge in the corner," he replied. Flesch points out that with phonics instruction, a child learns to read by midterm of first grade. There should be no such thing as levels of reading, he says. Once a child knows how to read, he reads. He doesn't have to spend hours circling consonants on worksheets. The Commission on Reading report notes that Even young children often see the futility of doing workbook page after page. As one boy said, "There, I didn't understand that, but I got it done." Success stories. The basal reading textbook industry generates an estimated $300 million in annual revenues. The total cost of one copy of reading material per pupil in a full reading program can amount to well over $300. According to the Commission's report, large publishing companies invest upward of $15 million to bring out new basal reading programs. It adds, most programs begin at kindergarten and continue through the 8th grade. An entire basal reading program would make a stack of books and papers 4 feet high. One patch of sunlight in this gloomy landscape is Rochester, New York. In 1974, its school system was turning out troubled reading students faster than special remedial teachers could solve their problems. One of these teachers, Mary Burkhart, recalled in her foreword to Why Johnny Still Can't Read, the problem was that even 6th graders were still guessing at words. As a result, students were far below grade level in reading skills. That summer, the Rochester School Board appointed Burkhart director of reading, which led to the institution of phonics first instruction in the 46 elementary schools. Change came hard, she says. One veteran teacher said we were making a big mistake. Within a few months, though, she told me, I have taught reading for 20 years, but my first graders have never been as far advanced as they are this year. I just thought I was teaching reading before. 5 years later, Rochester's students were performing above grade level in the primary grades and at grade level in the intermediate grades. One librarian told me, our 2nd grade students are now reading like our 5th graders used to read. School systems in Mount Vernon, New York, Corpus Christi, Texas, Scottsdale, Arizona, and some public schools in the New York City system tell similar success stories. Impressed by such tidings, schools in Grass Valley, California, Boise, Idaho, and Pittsburgh have switched to phonics first. Why not just kick out Look and Say once and for all and supplant it with phonics first? As Michael Brunner, senior associate of the staff of the U.S. Department of Education, points out, most members of the reading establishment reject in theory and in practice a pro-phonics approach to reading instruction. Also, many of the professors who write the textbooks their students must buy and use espouse the Look and Say method. What can a parent do? Find out what system your local schools use and demand phonics first. But there are snares here, as many Look and Say books have wrapped themselves in camouflage. One good way to find out if a book is really phonics first is to see if the first unit deals with the sounds of vowels and consonants in isolation and within words. Among the mementos of his long battle that Flesch cherishes most are letters from grateful parents who have used the lessons in the back of Why Johnny Can't Read, the ones little Luke used. From Louisville, Kentucky, a mother told how her 9-year-old could not read and had been pronounced dyslexic. I used your drills, she writes. By 6th grade, Dan was at grade level in reading and 3 years advanced in vocabulary. A New Jersey clergyman wrote, I first encountered Why Johnny Can't Read 20 years ago and used it to teach my 4 preschool children to read. Let me give you a progress report on my offspring. Cynthia, Princeton, 80. Harvard Business School, 85. Philip, Colgate, 83. Edward, Boston College, 85. Frederick, Harvard, 88. Thank you. Preface. This double-purpose book, with its rather awkward double-purpose title, needs a bit of explanation. Let me put it this way. Just as war is too serious a matter to be left to the generals, so, I think, the teaching of reading is too important to be left to the educators. This book, therefore, is not addressed to teachers and teachers' college professors, but to fathers and mothers. I tried, to the best of my ability, to write a book they can use to help their children read. But in the United States of 1955, a simple home primer wouldn't have a chance. It would have to make its way against the almost solid opposition of teachers, school officials, and educational experts. And that's why this book is not only a practical handbook, but also a little compendium of arguments against our current system of teaching reading. So please forgive me if the structure of the book seems a little peculiar. Most of the first part is theory and argument, and all of the second part is straight home primer. But there is also some practical stuff in chapters 2 and 10, which I felt had to go in there because otherwise the rest of the book wouldn't be fully intelligible. Perhaps some readers will have no use for the exercises. Perhaps some others will want to have the book for the exercises only. I can't tell. At any rate, the exercises can be used independently by following the instructions on pages 139 to 140. RF.